What's happening, Panda Nation? Peter von Panda, and I'm here with my 2016 Chevy Spark. Now, I didn't buy this car, I actually rented it, and I wanted to show you some of the things that I love and some of the things that I hate. Now, I'm going to go kind of over the exterior here, then we'll jump inside and I'll give you some of my experiences inside as well as driving. If you want to find out more about this car, one of the places that you won't find any information is at autotrader.com/oversteer. So don't go there. Now, all right, here is the Chevy Spark. Actually, this is one of the cars that I was considering when I bought my Fiat 500. And, you know, driving this one, even though this is pretty new, it's kind of about a year or two old, I'm glad I didn't, basically. It's, you know, it's not a bad looking car. You know, for a small car and for a four-door small car, I actually think it's really, decently attractive. You know, to me, the rear three-quarter view or the front three-quarter view aren't particularly bad. I think either of them are pretty nice. Now, my issue is I think that they don't really mesh well, and part of that is where I've been anchored in my mind. When I saw this probably a decade ago, the Chevy Spark concept car, I actually thought it was really nice. Now, there were a couple of changes that happened that are pretty subtle. The concept to production was actually fairly faithful, but a couple of the changes they made just kind of really thinned it out a little bit, and, you know, didn't really deliver kind of the bulky brawniness that the concept car had. First of all, even though they kept this wedge-shaped, you know, headlight here, I think they brought it down a little further as opposed to kind of stopping it a little higher. So it was a little higher on the deck here, and so it kind of lifted the front end up. You know, as we looked at the back, it kind of sits pretty high. It looks kind of like a high back end, and that's kind of nice. I actually like it. But because the headlights come down so far, it kind of really brings down the front end, and it makes the headlights look really big versus the rest of the bumper. And especially down here on the rest of the bumper, where they added, you know, a lot of detail that was really kind of just a very smooth, kind of bulky looking front fascia, and it really made the front end look more muscular. Smaller headlights, bigger lower front fascia, kind of matched the brawniness of the rear end. And so it kind of, even though most of the elements are here on the front end, just didn't look as good to me. On a side note, I think red is not the right color for this. I actually think you need like an electric green or gray or black or something like that. Red is a little too bright for a car that should be a little more, you know, either a little more subtle or just off the charts, kind of in your face. The wheels aren't bad on here, I think. Now, the other thing that they changed in the concept to production is they made it a four-door. Now, even though this back door here actually has the door handle hidden, so it doesn't actually maybe even look like a four-door at first glance, you know, on the concept, this door came all the way back here, so it had this big door, which also made kind of this rear C-pillar portion really thick and look very meaty. And then they also smoothed all this out. Even though they had like a wheel well curve on here, you know, all of this, you know, all of these extra lines kind of continue to thin out the car, make it a little, like, you know, longer as opposed to kind of taller. And so what they've tried to do, I feel like, is kind of make the car look bigger. And I've said it in the previous, you know, videos that cars like the Fiat 500, the Smart 4 too, they're small. Embrace the small. You know, I think the Mini was really successful because they embraced its size. They didn't try to do like kind of visual effects to make it look like a longer car or a taller car. Smart in the same way, and Fiat in a similar way. And so I think they tried to bring large car elements here to kind of make it look like it has more dimension. Now, I will say, over the original Aveo, I think this was a step up. But over the previous generation of Aveo, I thought they actually did pretty well on that one. And so I actually don't know that I like this actually over the model that it replaces just previous to this. Now, all right, so here we are inside the Chevy Spark. First thing I want to show you, and like I said, excruciating detail, so we have that typical flip out key that you might expect. But one thing I find interesting is that it's just a regular key. It's not like center cut, where the inside portion is kind of hollowed out on the channel. It's just like literally a regular old school key. So I feel like it's, you know, the ignition cylinder on this thing is not kind of the more modern ignition cylinder with the teeth in the middle. It's the one on the outside, so not a big deal. But you have a flip key and it has a regular key on it. Now, let me just go ahead and start it up here. I think a number of things I actually really do like. I actually like the way the steering wheel looks. I like how these arms all kind of bent in. It gives the steering wheel a nice 3D look to it. And the controls, which you almost think are paddle shifters, are volume up and down, so that you can see here, click, click, and they're really easy to get to. I was kind of expecting them to be on the back of the steering wheel here, but this is kind of nice. Although, like I said, when I first put my hands back there, I thought they were 4 shifting gears, and obviously you can see here they work. I'm just going to turn it down here a little bit. The other thing that you'll notice is shared out of the Chevy Sonic. Wow, that's some alliteration. You have this motorcycle inspired gauge cluster, I guess. You have the speedo here and all this data right here. The thing about this is I actually kind of like it. It's a little bit trick and trendy, and it does car all right. I actually really like the smaller cluster. I just think there's so much, like your tack and all that would be really big. And it just doesn't need to be like that, especially in a car like this that isn't really known for revving. It almost could be a little smaller in my opinion, because the cool thing is, kind of like the original Nissan Zs and the Infiniti G35s, if I go ahead and show you, the steering wheel does adjust up and down. That cluster adjusts with it. Now, even though I have it in the highest position here, as I'm looking down on it, my camera might not right be where my eyes are. I'll put it right in front of my face here, but it does kind of cut off the top. It almost could be a little smaller and a little lower in some ways, but I actually kind of dig that. Now, what I think they do probably in all the Chevy Sparks is they paint the side trim, you know, the trim that goes all the way around the dash here, and it's in silver, and I think they do that to match the steering wheel as well as the center console shifter and cover there, and to kind of give it a more an upscale look. It'd be you know, my preference if it were a little bit more like an aluminum finish as opposed to very clearly painted. And unlike my Fiat 500 where it's painted to be body color, it's just silver, and it really does look like painted material. I feel like over time this could not wear really well. You can see that there's a cubby right there, and then there's this other cubby right up here, but they're kind of not really sized for anything normal. I tried putting my cell phone in here, a 7 Plus, and it doesn't really fit. It kind of sticks out. I feel like if your passenger put it here, it would stick out. I mean, maybe it's good for pens and things like that, but then I feel like it's just painted material, and so it could get kind of scratched up and really show wear. But it's not showing too much wear right now. We have almost 40,000 miles on this rental car, okay? So, the other thing I want to show you here is the handle. I noticed are particularly cheap. It's funny because even though this is all pretty hard touch plastic, they do put a fairly nice, like kind of animal skin hide texture on it. But this little plastic ring is just like that typical, you know, dimpled plastic, and it feels really cheap. You know, there are lots of cheap bits. I mean, the car is meant to be cheap. I mean, it's ideally a cheap car, and they do a good job of, like I said, of hiding some of these hard plastics, like putting some texture lines. They put this little like a honeycomb texture on it, which kind of helps break up reflection. And I don't know that these lines here that kind of sweep down and kind of reinforce the center waterfall do anything for me. If you look at the seats, they do some of these lines as well, and I guess it kind of makes it look a little more higher end, you know, but what it does is it just reinforces in your mind that it's not leather, that it's not a high-end material, because this fabric is actually fairly nice. It kind of feels like a, you know, a tight weave, you know, polyester, and then they have like these vinyl bolsters. I'm going to assume that they're all vinyl, and these actually look and feel pretty good. It's very similar to the Fiat 500s in that they put some vinyl and they put like this cloth material, but they don't put any of this pattern on the material. And I guess while it, like I said, in some ways looks kind of artsy and cool, on the other hand, you never see anything like this on leather, and so it just instantly kind of hits you in the face that, oh, these aren't leather. And then to have that reinforced here is it's subtle, I guess, but it just doesn't do anything for me. Now, one of the things that I do kind of hate, and actually the stereo is actually pretty good. I'm going to show you a little bit of that later. But as you can see, what we have here are like these molded in, you know, speaker housing. It's on both sides. You can kind of see them if I pull out like this, and they're just really overt, and they don't, you know, they're all the same color plastic, so they don't look like a speaker grill inside like a metal speaker ring or anything like that. And so I feel like they did that to make this car look like it almost has an aftermarket stereo system, to kind of really, you know, highlight the fact that we've got stereo speakers, you know, front and center, and they're just kind of elevated. I feel like you could have made those speaker grills, you know, just punched out in the dash, you know, a speaker grill, and really kind of made them more subtle. But I feel like they overtly made them like this because people want to be young, hip, and cool. So I don't like it. It's almost too overt to me, but it's okay. It is what it is. That being said, the speaker system in here is actually pretty good. For not knowing where any other speakers are, like you can see in the doors, I don't seem to see any. And in the back, there are obviously some. You know, it actually sounds relatively decent. Now, that brings me to the head unit, and I will tell you that using these for volume control is easier than these little capacitive buttons here, in my opinion. And you have to hold down this power button for it to do things, right? That kind of took, I kept tapping it, and that kind of took me a little time to figure out. Now the screen, this is everything, this is what's coming in all Chevys, I believe, right? So the screen is kind of like a tablet. There's no CD player, there's no tape deck, which there shouldn't be at this point, but it does have like a head unit and radio and all that. I haven't played around with it. But I do want to say that even though this is kind of an anti-reflective screen, it apparently is resistive touch. That is a little bit jarring for any of us that use tablets. And I want to show you where I really discovered it. When I got in here, the speakers on the back were on, but the speakers in the front were on. So you have to go to menu here to get to the kind of the balance. Maybe it's under tone settings, and you really have to press these things, right? In most cases, you have to press them more than you're kind of expecting. If you use a tablet where you just kind of lay your finger on it, you really do have to touch things. Now, the big problem is accuracy, in my opinion. When you're hitting big buttons like these, it's not a big problem, but I was trying to recenter the speaker focus, and let me just get it off there, and I was tapping this, and as you can see, I was kind of tapping it, and there I got it in the center. But every time I was tapping it and trying to tap to the center, it never really quite went where I wanted it to. And I figured out that you really got to use your fingernail to kind of center it. And because if you use your finger like this, I can't see where the the dot is. So you got to use your fingernail to center it. And obviously, capacitive touch wouldn't register a fingernail. So it's one of those things where you get spoiled by capacitive touch, and when you go to a resistive touch screen, you just got to kind of relearn some things, like you really have to touch it, you know. Not a big deal, but it was different. Otherwise, like I said, I think the sound quality is actually decent for this car. It's a little tinny, even though I put the equalizer on rock, you know, which should be as much bass as you're going to get out of the audio setting. And I really do love the Apple CarPlay. I can't demo to you because I'm using my phone here, but I did plug in a lightning cable. The plug is down here. There's another power accessory port right there, 12 volt, and then I plug this in. And the cool thing about CarPlay is that you can plug in my phone, you can plug in a guest phone, you can plug in, you know, your friend can drive this car and plug in his phone, and it just will recognize that phone and work off of it, so they can use their own GPS navigation destinations, the whole 9 yards. So I do love that. I wish CarPlay and Android Play, or whatever they call it, Android Car or whatever, were just standard equipment in all cars, and I wish they made more head units with the CarPlay. I know the more and more are coming out, but especially if you have an older car and you want to upgrade your head unit, you know, that should just be standard. It's pretty awesome. Now, this brings me to a gripe in that, you know, the power accessory port's down here, fine, and then you have an aux in here as well. But this is really the only place you have to put your phone, unless you want to put it in the cup holders. I like I said, I threw it in up here, doesn't fit. I threw it in here down here, it doesn't really fit either. I mean, it's the biggest and best place it can go. I almost wish there were a shelf or kind of like a narrower cubby right here so I could slide my phone in like that, because, you know, with the 7 Plus, it's just not big enough, and this is all hard plastic, it's not rubber lined, so I kind of had it flopping and sliding, and I was just like, how does no one at GM, you know, put all this stuff in, and the first time they plug in their phone, they're like, oh, I wish I had a better place to put my phone, right? So big miss on their part. No center console. Again, this is something that's just like my Fiat 500. I wish there were here. I mean, it does give you a cup holder for the back seat then, and your e-brake here, but you only have one armrest. And again, that's another thing that I didn't like about my 500, because what ends up happening is your guests get in, and because these cars are so narrow, they spread out and they put their armrest on your armrest, and you don't have it, and they don't even realize that it's not their armrest. So I really wish at least both seats would have it. Now, on my Fiat 500, I've actually looked at getting some replacement seat with the armrest built in, because on some models they did have that, but on this Spark, only one armrest, and it's decent, vinyl covered, but no center console or anything like that. You know, it is kind of what it is. I don't want to go into all the stuff that you will normally see. The last thing I do want to call out here is that this greenhouse on this is great. Visibility is great. You know, one of my gripes about the exterior styling is that they actually widened these windows off the concept car, but it gives you really good visibility. I didn't like the style element of it, but it kind of drops this line, kind of like the Ford F-150s have a kick down here. And so I actually really have a great view of the road, because I would normally expect the windowsill to be up here, but you can look all the way down. Now you do have a little bit of like this quarter window, which is a little weird, and then this mounting plate basically for the rear view mirror there. But overall, you know, this gives you just a great command of the road. It's easy to kind of check your blind spot and you know, see where the curb is on the other side, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, you know, it is what it is. It's an inexpensive car, and I think they've done a nice job. I will say, just in general, what they're missing here is a little bit of soul. It's kind of like GM Parts Bin. They did a nice job of trying to integrate, you know, their center waterfall design into this car, which I think is a little dated, but you know, they're just kind of trying to use that language throughout the interior. And in my opinion, you know, they could have just embraced maybe a little more Chevy heritage or something a little cooler. You know how Mini kind of makes their center cluster circular, or you know, even Smart kind of has this layered dashboard in the 4.2s with little kind of bug eye gauges. I think they could have embraced the small, the minimalism, the tiny car aspect a little bit more, but they really didn't do that here. So, you know, it's pretty good, but, you know, and for a car that I was really expecting to be competitive with my Fiat 500 at the time, you know, particularly because it has extra doors and the rear seats, right? So I can kind of fit people in their own doors in a more spacious seat. I'm really glad that I got the 500 at the time. All right, guys, so I'm in the Spark driving, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on the car. First of all, road noise. I'm driving at about 70 miles an hour and on a abandoned road in Mexico, and it has pretty good road and wind noise. I mean, I can hear some whistling, you know, not like high-pitched whistling, but something like, you know, that's interrupting the wind coming in. It could be door sills or something like that, as well as I'm getting just a lot of road noise and vibration coming in just through the cabin. Now, that being said, when people get in my Fiat, they also complain about that. Like, man, it's so loud in here. I'm about to hit all these birds. But I think it's worse. And I've noticed that I really have to crank up the stereo, which, by the way, doesn't sound bad, but has absolutely no bass, in case you care, to hear it really well, or to hear it well enough that it's enjoyable to listen to. And so even on, you know, a pretty decent highway road, you definitely get a lot of noise. Now, my bigger complaint is this car is really darty, and I probably won't be able to capture it on video, but it's just a little weird in that you can kind of pick a line, be on a flat road, and then all of a sudden the car will kind of feel like, it almost feels like the ball joints, the lower ball joints are loose, or the lug nuts are loose, and the car kind of flops like 2 or 3 inches to one side, like it kind of settles on like wheels that aren't aligned right. And it's not like it kind of dives and wants to go into the next lane. It just kind of flops on a different line that you're already heading on. And it's really weird. And to me, I think these are smaller wheels than the upsized wheels I put on my Fiat. And when I put the bigger wheels on my Fiat, I definitely felt like road grooves more and bumps and things like that. But I never felt like the car really got into like road grooves and kind of was, you know, pushed to one side or the other. And so I'm not sure if it's a combination of wind or really skinny tires that are really susceptible to imperfections in the pavement, but the car definitely like will just kind of surprise you sometimes when you're driving. You think you're on a line, making very small, minute adjustments, and then all of a sudden it just kind of shoots off to one side. It can be a little unnerving, especially in tight traffic, or if you're kind of already close or feel close to cars next to you. So that's definitely a complaint of mine. You know, probably 90% of the time, not a big deal, but when it does happen, it kind of registers. The Spark also makes a lot of engine noise, not exhaust noise. In fact, I can't even really hear the exhaust, but I get a lot of noise coming from up front, under acceleration, but not even heavy acceleration, just normal acceleration. It's not a good noise like a Mustang or a BMW. It's kind of like a little bit of like a exhaustly type of noise. Not as bad or as harsh, but it's just loud. It just feels like the only thing separating me and the engine is like a plastic firewall. It's pretty noisy. Let's take off here and let you hear it. one of the other things that I really hate, it might not show up here on camera too well, but you know, I've been driving, and the sun is pretty high in the sky at the moment, and there are some, you know, shapes on the dashboard, including the speaker, which I'll have talked about, and what they do is they reflect up into the glass, you know, and I've been driving it for a couple of hours, so you know, the sun doesn't have to be directly over your overhead. It can be looking over your shoulder like it is kind of on the horizon, and they just continue to reflect. And because they're kind of rounded, they also give you a little like direct reflection and then some dark areas, which explains the reason why most automakers just give you a very flat dash, right? They just make it single color. They try to make it dark so that it's not very distracting. But right in my line of sight, I've got especially these two bumps on the dashboard, which appear to be just for, you know, design purposes, are right in my field of view, and it's probably where a head-up display, you know, illumination would be, which would be perfect. But in this case, it's just dashboard features being reflected in glass, and that speaker over there as well. That's a little more out of the way, but it's just kind of annoying. And for the last few hours, it's your eye kind of bounces between that. It doesn't obstruct your view, obviously, but it's just one of those things where, you know, it doesn't have to be there, and if they had just made that flat and textured it like the rest of the dashboard, you wouldn't even notice it. But it gets annoying very quickly. That's something I absolutely hate. In fact, if I own this car and we're going to continue to drive it a long time, I might even get one of those, you know, fabric dash covers just to put on it over the whole dash, just to kind of hide that. Hate it. So, you know, that's my Chevy Spark kind of summary. Now, I will say, after driving it and spending some time with it, for being a cheap car, you can't expect the world, right? And I will say here, though, that if you are thinking of this car, and me having driven it, and, you know, on my styling issues that I mentioned at the very beginning, I would probably, personally, if I were to go GM on this, go with the Chevy Sonic. I think the front end looks a little bit larger, broader, a little more aggressive. Overall, it's about the same size. The interior is very similar. It uses that same kind of single motorcycle instrument cluster, and so you get a lot of the same elements, but I think just kind of in a more finished, more balanced, more muscular car without having much more footprint than the Spark does. So just my 2 cents on it. Hope that helps if you're thinking about a Chevy Spark. There it is. I like it. It's good for what it is, but in the small compact car market, I think a number of better options. Peter von Panda out.